Okay, so today we're going to talk about the first president of the United States. Obviously, that was George Washington. What Washington did as first president was he set a precedent. A precedent is something done or said that serves an example or a model. Washington was the first president, the first one to do this job, and basically what happened is he set a mold, a precedent, that all presidents after followed. For example, one of the most well-known precedents that he set was that he refused to serve a third term in office. And so every president that followed him up until FDR also only served 2 terms in office. Okay, so let's talk about some of the things that Washington did and some of the struggles that he had as the nation's first president. The first thing that he did was that he helped establish the Supreme Court under the judicial branch with the Federal Judiciary Act. This created a 6, and later that's going to be a 9-member Supreme Court, and named John Jay as the first Chief Justice. Okay, Washington also established the first cabinet. Now, a cabinet is a group of advisors, and they're the heads of departments. Washington's cabinet was much smaller than today's presidents have, but we're going to talk about the first cabinet and what those offices were and who held them. The first was the Secretary of War, and that was held by Henry Knox. Henry Knox then would be an advisor to Washington on matters of military defense and war. Secretary of State was Thomas Jefferson. The Secretary of State's job is to deal with foreign countries and build workable relationships. So under Jefferson, Washington thought Jefferson would be a great fit for that because he had previously been the ambassador to France. He was respected worldwide. Number 3, Secretary of Treasury. That was led by Alexander Hamilton. Secretary of Treasury is the office that overlooks the financial affairs of the United States. Alexander Hamilton was very well versed in economics and had some great ideas for making the new nation prosperous economically. Okay, then the 4th is not really a cabinet position, but the Attorney General was Edmund Randolph. You've heard of him before. He was at the Constitution signing, and he was involved in coming up with some of the framework for the United States government. Okay, Washington's going to face a lot of problems as the first president. We have just split away from Britain not that long ago. It's been about 8 years now, and we as a new nation have a lot of issues. The first issue is obviously going to be an economic issue. When we split from Britain, we no longer use the British currency. We no longer rely on the British government to help us in any way. We're no longer taxed by the British government. We've also been to war, and we have debts that we have to pay, not only to Britain and France, but we also have debts that we have to pay to our own citizens. So Hamilton decided to create a financial plan, and it had 3 steps. 1, he wanted to pay off all war debts to the citizens within the country. He felt if the government paid those debts of the country, then would be free and clear, and they could then go on to do number 2, which is raise government revenues through taxes. Number 3 was create a national bank. Okay, so that was his plan. He was going to pay off the state's debts, and then he was going to raise taxes, and he wanted to create a national bank which would serve as a place to house U.S. money and offer loans. Okay, so a tariff is going to be a tax on imported goods. He instated a tariff And this means any goods brought in to the country had a tax. Okay, the second problem that Washington faced was interpreting the Constitution. This is going to be basically Jefferson versus Hamilton. Jefferson believed in a strict interpretation, which means the government only has powers that are listed in the Constitution. Hamilton believed in a loose interpretation, which means the government has other powers not listed, and he refers to the Elastic Clause, which says that the government can do anything that is necessary and proper for the good of the country. The issue over the interpretation of the Constitution is actually going to arise over the National Bank. Jefferson did not believe the National Bank was constitutional because nowhere in the Constitution does it mention the government establishing a national bank. Hamilton, on the other hand, believed that just because it doesn't say it doesn't mean that we can't create one if it's going to be necessary and good for the nation. They debated it quite a lot, got heated, they talked to Washington about it. Washington sided with Hamilton. It's actually going to push Jefferson to resign his position because he so strongly disagrees with the founding of the National Bank. Okay, the third problem is going to be the Whiskey Rebellion. And this is when a group of farmers in Pennsylvania staged a rebellion over the high tax on whiskey. The issue is we needed revenue, taxes were high. Farmers used whiskey as trade. They helped create whiskey, and it was definitely a source of income for them. So when they're taxed highly on it, that affects their financial state. And they were going broke, and they did not want to pay this tax on whiskey. And so they staged a rebellion similar to Shays' Rebellion, but Washington was faced with the decision, what do I do in this case? And he kind of said, I'm going to go a little bit overboard to prove that the federal government is strong, much stronger than it was under the Articles of Confederation. So we sent 13,000 troops in to crush the rebellion. And of course they crushed it right away, and Washington was able to prove that the federal government under the new Constitution was much stronger than it had ever been under the Articles of Confederation. Fourth issue were British and French tensions. Okay? While Washington was president, the French Revolution was going on in France. It was a very bloody time period in France. In 1789, the French people decided that they wanted to become a democratic society, and they wanted to overthrow the king and queen at the time. And so they stormed the Bastille. It became very bloody. The French expected America to become involved on the side of freedom, because what had the French done only a few years earlier? They had come to our aid against our king and in our revolution. Many Americans at first sided with France and did want to become involved, but then it got really bloody, so bloody that they beheaded the king and queen, they put their heads on the stakes, they marched them through town, and it kind of turned the stomachs of many Americans, and they said, it's just too bloody for us to get involved. Okay. Number two, the British started seizing U.S. ships, and then we also had issues with them in the Ohio Valley. If you remember, in the Treaty of Paris, they were supposed to leave the United States, and they didn't. And so we had this issue where it almost became something that we'd have to do military intervention with, but we were able to sign some treaties after one short battle, and the British finally left. In all of this, though, Washington said we would remain neutral. And neutral means not siding with one country or another. So Washington's foreign policy was, we are not going to get involved. We are going to worry about what is going on within the United States, and we are not going to get involved in any way with problems in other countries. He wanted to avoid going to war. We had just fought a war. We were in economic turmoil. We were trying to overcome the debt that we had fought, or that we had accrued during the American Revolution, and he said we just weren't ready for war. Okay, so Washington ends up serving 2 terms, total of 8 years. He does a good job. He is still considered a great president. He's very well respected. Most Americans know who George Washington is and the role that he served in our country. He set many precedents, many examples, led the way for shaping the president's office to what it is today. When he left, he was asked to serve a 3rd term, and he said no. He was ready to retire. And so when he left, he gave a farewell address. And within the farewell address, he warned against 3 things. And these 3 issues that he warned against still ring true today. Okay, so the first warning he gave was, do not form political parties. He said political parties would split the nation, divide it into 2 or 3 sections, and you wouldn't want to work together to come up with a solution, because your interests would be vested with whichever political party you sided with. That is something that we are facing today. It is, believed that the political parties are splitting our nation. Well, some believe that anyways. And so it's possible that Washington had a good warning there. It's almost like Washington stepped into a time machine, fast-forwarded to today's time period, and saw some issues that we faced as a country, and then came back and warned us against it. He definitely had a vision for the future that many did not. Number 2, avoid permanent alliances with other countries. He said, do not make it a permanent alliance with another country, because what's going to end up happening is they're going to expect you to come get involved in wars and issues that we have no business being involved in. Number 3, do not allow the country to go into debt. He said if we go into debt, we're just owing people, and it becomes a burden on the government, it becomes a burden on the people. So these 3 warnings were things that he said would damage the country: political parties, permanent alliances with foreign countries, and debt. When Washington left office, the next one to step in is going to be John Adams, which we will talk about at a later date.